Star Trek's very first villains began a theme every series since as followed. Star Trek's very first villains established a theme that would continue in every Star Trek TV series and movie throughout the franchise. Star Trek's original pilot, The Cage, was produced in 1964, introducing the USS Enterprise commanded by Captain Christopher Pike, Jeffrey Hunter. Although NBC rejected The Cage and ordered a second pilot that became Star Trek, the original series, The Cage's events canonically predate the known events of the 23rd century seen in Star Trek, the original series, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, and the first 6 Star Trek movies. Hence, the denizens of Talos 4 are Star Trek's original villains, who aren't really villains. Star Trek isn't defined by a simplistic good versus evil paradigm. While the Starfleet officers of Star Trek are inherently noble and open-minded, they can fall prey to all manner of weaknesses in human nature. Conversely, Star Trek's villains are rarely mustache-twirling black hats. The antagonists of Star Trek tend to desire specific goals, and their needs conflict with the needs of the many. The various alien races cast as Star Trek villains are also usually motivated by the preservation or manifest destiny of their species. Indeed, races like the Klingons, Romulans, and the Dominion often see themselves as the heroes, and the United Federation of Planets as the evil empire. The Talosians were Star Trek's very first villains, but weren't really villains. Star Trek's very first villains are the Talosians in The Cage, and the twist is they are not truly villains. Powerful psychics capable of casting immersively lifelike illusions, the Talosians lured the USS Enterprise to Talos 4 in order to trap Captain Christopher Pike. However, the Talosians did so to find Vina, Susan Oliver, a mate. Vina was a human who crashed on Talos 4 years prior, and the Talosians took responsibility for the girl when the rest of her starship's crew perished. The Talosians did kidnap Captain Pike, but only to give Vina, who is gruesomely deformed, a happier life in a perfect illusion. Proving they were not malevolent, the Talosians released Captain Pike after they concluded from their experiments that human beings cannot be caged. Thus, Pike would not be a good mate for Vina when held against his will. In Star Trek, the original series' The Menagerie, the Talosians helped Spock, Leonard Nimoy, bring the permanently disfigured fleet Captain Pike, Sean Kenny, to Talos 4 to live out his life in a perfect illusion with Vina. In Star Trek Discovery Season 2, the Talosians also helped heal LT. Spock's, Ethan Peck, fractured mind, hardly the actions of villains. Every Star Trek TV show since has featured morally ambiguous antagonists. The Talosians in Star Trek's The Cage set the stage for the morally complex Star Trek villains to come. Star Trek, the original series heavies included space gods like the lonely Greek deity Apollo, Michael Forrest, the overpowered child Trellin, William Campbell, and Captain James T. Kirk's William Shatner, first enemy, Lt. Gary Mitchell, Gary Lockwood, who was corrupted by his powerful ESP abilities. Klingons were ruthless, but have a complex society based on honor, while the devious Romulans have depth and layers of secrets. It takes a jump to the mirror universe to find Star Trek villains who revel in being evil. In 1966, Star Trek, the original series, TOS, introduced the world to the vision of creator Gene Roddenberry, a future where humanity had overcome its most significant internal divisions to explore the stars, forming the United Federation of Planets. But while the future of Star Trek was one of optimism, hope, and unity, it quickly became apparent that not all life forms in the galaxy shared those ideals. From its earliest episodes, Star Trek embraced a storytelling approach where villains were more than just enemies to defeat. They were often reflections of the darker sides of human nature and existential threats, testing the ethical and moral boundaries of the show's heroes. These themes, established from the very first villains of TOS, set a precedent that would influence every Star Trek series since. The first villain, Gary Mitchell, in the second pilot episode of TOS, Where No Man Has Gone Before, Star Trek introduced its first major villain, Gary Mitchell, a close friend of Captain James T. Kirk. Mitchell, a human crew member of the USS Enterprise, gains godlike psychic powers after passing through a mysterious energy field at the edge of the galaxy. What made Mitchell such a compelling antagonist was not just the threat he posed as a superpowered being, but the way in which his transformation mirrored one of humanity's greatest fears: the corrupting influence of absolute power. Mitchell's transformation explores the tension between human nature and godhood. As his powers grow, so does his arrogance and contempt for those he once considered friends. In the end, Kirk is forced to confront his former friend, recognizing that Mitchell's newfound abilities have made him a danger to everyone. The episode ends with the tragic realization that unchecked power can strip away one's humanity. This concept of power corrupting individuals, especially those with good intentions, became a recurring theme throughout Star Trek. The villain as a mirror, the Talosians in the series' original unaired pilot, The Cage, later repurposed for the two-part episode The Menagerie. Star Trek presents the Talosians, an alien species that had become physically weakened after relying on their mental abilities to create powerful illusions. The Talosians' plan is to trap Captain Christopher Pike, Kirk's predecessor, and use him to repopulate their dying world through manipulation and control. The Talosians embody a key theme that Star Trek would revisit throughout its run: the danger of stagnation and the moral implications of manipulation, even with good intentions. Their advanced mental powers have rendered them inert, dependent on the suffering of others for their amusement. Pike's resistance to their influence demonstrates humanity's enduring struggle for freedom and autonomy, even when faced with beings far more powerful. The Talosians serve as a cautionary tale about the consequences of a society that chooses comfort and illusion over the pursuit of truth and progress, a theme that echoes in later villains, from the godlike Q in The Next Generation (TNG) to the oppressive Dominion in Deep Space Nine (DS9). The Klingons, War and Honor. One of the most iconic villainous races introduced in TOS was the Klingons, first appearing in the episode Errand of Mercy. Initially depicted as ruthless warmongers and enemies of the Federation, the Klingons represented Cold War tensions, reflecting the fears of aggression and militarism that defined the era. Yet even in their early appearances, there was an underlying complexity to the Klingons. They were not portrayed as mere monsters, but as a culture with its own sense of honor, albeit one rooted in conquest and power. Over time, the Klingons evolved from being simple antagonists to a fully fleshed-out warrior race with a complex code of ethics. This development is emblematic of one of Star Trek's most enduring themes: the idea that enemies can become allies once they are better understood. This notion would come full circle in TNG, where the Klingons become Federation allies, with characters like Worf becoming beloved members of Starfleet. The transformation of the Klingons from villains to allies shows Star Trek's commitment to exploring the possibility of reconciliation and growth, even between former enemies. Recurring themes in later series, the template established by the early villains of Star Trek, where antagonists are not simply evil but are often distorted reflections of human nature, continued to be a defining trait of the franchise in every subsequent series. In Star Trek: The Next Generation, the omnipotent Q challenged Captain Jean-Luc Picard and his crew, acting as both judge and provocateur. Q's mischievous and often dangerous games forced the crew to confront the limits of human understanding and morality. His character embodies the themes of power and responsibility that began with Gary Mitchell, highlighting the dangers of absolute authority. Star Trek: Deep Space Nine introduced the Dominion, an empire ruled by the Founders, shape-shifting beings who sought to bring order to the galaxy through control and domination. The Founders' distrust of solids,